Picture this: a line of camels, their silhouettes dark against the golden glow of the setting sun, plodding steadily through a narrow mountain pass. The air is thick with the scent of spices, cinnamon, pepper, and something more mysterious, carried in tightly woven sacks. These travelers are merchants, yes, but also messengers of something far greater. They're part of a network so vast, so intricate, that it shaped the world as we know it. This is the Silk Road, the ancient highway of ideas, where silk wasn't the only treasure exchanged, where cultures collided, religions spread, and empires rose and fell, all to the rhythm of camel hooves on dusty trails. But here's the thing: the Silk Road wasn't just a route for goods. It was a living, breathing conversation between East and West, a dialogue that spanned thousands of miles and centuries. Think about it. A single bolt of silk from China could pass through the hands of Persian weavers, Byzantine traders, and Venetian merchants before reaching the courts of Europe. Along the way, it carried stories, whispers of distant lands, secrets of forgotten kingdoms, and the dreams of those who dared to journey into the unknown. What if I told you that some of the most fascinating chapters of human history were written not in palaces or battlefields, but in the caravanserais and marketplaces of this legendary trade network? That's exactly what we're uncovering today. We're setting off on a journey through time, retracing the footsteps of those who shaped the Silk Road, not just as merchants, but as explorers, scholars, and visionaries. From the lost cities buried beneath desert sands to the astonishing inventions that traveled farther than the people who created them, these are the stories that connect us all. Because the Silk Road isn't just history, it's the blueprint of our modern world, where borders blurred long before the word globalization existed. So, are you ready to step into the past and discover how a single thread of silk wove together the fate of civilizations? Let's begin. The story of the Silk Road begins not with merchants, but with an unlikely hero, a diplomat and explorer named Zhang, sent by Emperor Wu of the Han Dynasty in the 2nd century before the Common Era. His mission was dangerous and seemingly impossible: forge an alliance against a common enemy threatening China's western borders. Captured and held for years by nomadic tribes, Zhang eventually escaped, pressing onward through uncharted lands. Though he never secured the military alliance he sought, his journeys revealed something far more valuable: a world brimming with civilizations eager to trade, from the bustling markets of Central Asia to the distant empires of Persia and beyond. What Zhang discovered wasn't a single road, but a tapestry of ancient pathways carved by geography and ambition. To the north, rugged mountain passes offered shelter from the desert's wrath. To the south, oasis towns bloomed like emeralds in the sand, their wells sustaining caravans for centuries. These weren't just trade routes, they were lifelines shaped by the earth itself. And here's the twist: silk wasn't even the main attraction at first. China guarded its secret silk production fiercely, but the real spark came from something far simpler: horses. The Han Dynasty caught the powerful steeds of Central Asia to defend against invaders, and in exchange they offered gold, lacquerware, and yes, eventually those coveted bolts of silk. But the Silk Road's true genius lay in its unpredictability. It wasn't planned, it grew organically, a patchwork of shortcuts, detours, and chance encounters. A merchant might swap Chinese porcelain for Persian carpets in Samarkand, only to trade those carpets for Roman glass in Palmyra. Every transaction added another thread to the web, linking farmers, monks, and kings across continents. And this network thrived because of politics as much as profit. Empires like Rome and Parthia didn't just tolerate these routes, they protected them, stationing troops to ward off bandits and building caravanserais where weary travelers could rest. The Silk Road, in other words, was history's first experiment in globalization, fueled by equal parts diplomacy and daring, yet the most astonishing part. Many of the goods that traveled these paths never made it to the end of the journey. A bolt of silk might unravel across a dozen cities, its threads rewoven into new patterns, just as ideas transformed along the way. Buddhism migrated from India to China, while grapevines from the Mediterranean took root in the deserts of Xinjiang. Even paper, invented in China, would slowly spread westward, revolutionizing how the world recorded its stories. But that's just the beginning, because beyond silk, beyond spices and gems, the Silk Road traded something far more precious, the impossible possibility of connection. And that's where our journey takes us next, into the heart of the marketplace, where the ordinary and the extraordinary collided under the open sky. If you think silk was the only treasure changing hands along these ancient routes, think again. The Silk Road was a dazzling bazaar of the exotic and the everyday, where a single camel caravan might carry Persian saffron, Indian ivory, and Greek olive oil, all in the same load. Take spices, for instance. A pinch of Central Asian cumin could end up flavoring a nobleman's feast in Constantinople, while Chinese ginger found its way into medieval European medicines. These weren't just luxuries, they rewrote entire culinary traditions. Imagine Italian cuisine without citrus from the East, or Indian curries without chili peppers from the Americas, plants that crisscrossed the globe thanks to these very trade networks. Then there were the objects that defied borders entirely. Roman glass, so thin it shimmered like liquid light, has been unearthed in tombs as far east as China's Yellow River. Proof that artisans in Alexandria crafted vessels prized by aristocrats halfway across the world. And it wasn't just glass. Jade from the Kunlun Mountains adorned Persian daggers, while Byzantine gold coins turned up in the pockets of Tibetan traders. But perhaps the most surprising cargo, paper, a humble invention from Han China, became the canvas for everything from Buddhist sutras in Dunhuang to scientific treatises in Baghdad, proving that ideas traveled even faster than goods. What's truly remarkable is how these exchanges reshaped societies in ways no one could have predicted. When Chinese porcelain reached the Islamic world, potters in Persia and Syria scrambled to replicate its delicate beauty, sparking a ceramic revolution. Meanwhile, Central Asian musical instruments like the lute wove their way into European courts, evolving into the guitars and mandolins we know today. Even something as simple as a walnut carried from the foothills of the Himalayas to the Mediterranean transformed orchards and diets for centuries. Behind every spice, sack, and gemstone were the people who made these journeys possible. Picture a Sogdian merchant haggling over lapis lazuli in a Samarkand market, or a Nestorian monk tucking a bundle of silkworm cocoons into his robe as he trekked toward Byzantium. These weren't just traders, they were cultural alchemists blending traditions with every step, and sometimes the most valuable things they carried weren't goods at all, but knowledge. A single map sketched on parchment could reveal new routes, while a scrap of medical wisdom passed between caravans might save countless lives. The real magic of the Silk Road wasn't in the treasures themselves, but in how they forced the world to reimagine itself. A Persian astronomer studying star charts in Xi'an, a Greek doctor prescribing Chinese herbs in Antioch, these collisions of knowledge didn't just enrich empires. They built bridges between civilizations that had never dared to dream of one another, and that's the untold story. The Silk Road didn't just move goods. It moved minds. Among the shifting sands and mountain passes of the Silk Road moved a brotherhood of risk-takers merchants who turned peril into profession. Take the Sogdians, those master negotiators from Central Asia who became the backbone of trade between China and Persia. Fluent in half a dozen tongues, they didn't just move goods, they moved between worlds, translating not just languages but customs, haggling techniques, even humor. A 7th century Chinese account describes them as foxes of the marketplace, able to smell profit on the wind. Their caravans were mobile bazaars, 200 camels strong, laden with bolts of silk swaying like sails, jars of fermented mare's milk clinking against bundles of Iranian pistachios. Then there were the Venetian traders like Marco Polo's family, who didn't just travel the Silk Road, they weaponized its connections. While others feared the Mongol Empire, the Polos saw opportunity, securing a golden pass from Kublai Khan himself that acted as both safe conduct and VIP ticket across Asia. Their notebooks reveal the surreal mix of commerce and culture shock, bargaining for Tibetan musk deer pods one week, marveling at Chinese coal-burning stoves the next. But the real social alchemy happened in the caravanserais, those fortified inns dotting the route where Persian poets might share fireside tales with Tibetan yak herders. A 9th century Arab traveler wrote of hearing a chorus of languages in one courtyard from Tangut to Turkic, all shouting over each other yet somehow understanding. These weren't just pit stops. They were cultural laboratories where Buddhist monks debated Zoroastrian priests over cups of fermented grape juice, where Syrian glassblowers taught their techniques to Aighur apprentices. The marketplace was the ultimate melting pot. In Samarkand's Registan Square, a Byzantine merchant might trade Mediterranean coral for Cotonese jade using a mix of finger counting and pidgin Sogdian, while a scribe nearby penned contracts in 4 scripts simultaneously. Food stalls offered dumplings stuffed with Persian walnuts alongside sizzling skewers of Central Asian lamb, early fusion cuisine, even clothing hybridized, Chinese silk woven with Hellenistic patterns, Sasanian brocades tailored into Turkic riding coats. Yet every merchant knew these opportunities came at a price. The same caravanserai that offered warmth and wine could vanish overnight under a desert sandstorm. Bandits lurked in the Pamir passes where narrow trails left caravans vulnerable. A 15th century Persian chronicle tells of traders weighting their camels with bells, not for music but to scare away snow leopards and worse. Some dangers were human, corrupt border officials demanding gifts, or rival merchants spreading rumors of cursed goods. What's astonishing isn't that they faced these risks, but that they developed systems to manage them. Bills of exchange early travelers' checks let merchants deposit gold in Cashka and withdraw it in Baghdad. Coded caravan whistles warned of approaching danger. They even had primitive insurance. Caravan leaders distributed losses equally if bandits struck, ensuring no single trader faced ruin. These weren't just businessmen, they were pioneers of globalization, inventing solutions we still use today. Their true legacy lies in the fragments they left behind: a scrap of Sogdian love poetry scribbled on a caravan manifest, a child's toy camel carved from jade and tucked into a trader's grave. These artifacts whisper of lives spent in motion, where profit was just one thread in a richer tapestry. Because beyond the spices and silver, these merchants traded something irreplaceable: the courage to venture beyond the known world, and the wisdom to build bridges where others saw only borders. And as their caravans pressed onward through dust and darkness, they carried with them the fragile, flickering light of connection, a light that would eventually illuminate the world. For all its riches and wonders, the Silk Road earned its legend not just through trade, but through sheer survival. Those who dared to cross it faced nature's fury at every turn, starting with the Taklamakan Desert, a wasteland so treacherous that its very name translates to the place of no return. Picture a sea of shifting dunes where temperatures swung from scorching days to freezing nights, where mirages taunted travelers with visions of water that vanished as they approached. Chinese chronicles tell of caravans that strayed just slightly off course, only to be swallowed by sandstorms, their bones emerging centuries later as grim markers for those who followed. Then there were the mountains, the jagged teeth of the Pamirs, where narrow paths clung to cliffsides so steep that camels were often blindfolded to keep them from panicking. Avalanches could bury entire parties without warning, while sudden blizzards left travelers disoriented in whiteouts. Marco Polo's own journals recount how his uncle's caravan vanished in these passes, their fate unknown until a shepherd stumbled upon frozen bodies years later, their silks still brightly colored against the snow. Bandits prowled these isolated stretches like wolves, drawn by the promise of unguarded wealth. The Sogdians had a saying, "A loaded camel sings louder than a guard's sword." Raiders from tribes like the Karakanids specialized in ambushing exhausted caravans at dawn, when travelers were weakest. Some outlaws even mimicked merchant signals using counterfeit caravan bells to lure victims into canyons where escape was impossible. Yet these very dangers forged the Silk Road's ingenuity. Merchants developed codes to outwit bandits, like hiding gems in hollowed-out bread loaves or sewing pearls into the hems of children's coats. They timed journeys to avoid summer's furnace heat and winter's deadly chill, relying on generations of knowledge about secret springs and lunar cycles. Caravans moved in tight formations, scouts riding ahead to check for disturbed earth, a telltale sign of buried spike traps. But perhaps the most brilliant adaptation was the relay system. Instead of risking the entire route, merchants began trading goods in segments, passing them like batons between trusted partners at Oasis towns. A bolt of silk might change hands a dozen times before reaching its destination, each trader adding a sliver of profit while avoiding the deadliest stretches. This wasn't just business, it was a survival network, built on trust as much as gold. And when the desert's thirst or the mountain's cruelty grew unbearable, hope shimmered on the horizon in the form of oases like Dunhuang or Cashka. These lush islands in the wilderness weren't just stops, they were sanctuaries where caravans regrouped, where languages and religions mingled under the shade of apricot trees. Here, a traveler could bathe in ice cave springs, barter for fresh camels, and hear news from the far ends of the earth, all while the scent of roasting lamb and fermenting grapes promised a fleeting taste of safety. But that's another story, one of bustling bazaars and whispered secrets, where the Silk Road didn't just endure, it thrived. Amid the Silk Road's harsh deserts and towering peaks, oasis cities bloomed like jewels strung along a golden chain, Samarkand with its turquoise-domed mosques, Dunhuang guarded by towering sandstone Buddhas, Cashka's labyrinth of spice-scented alleyways. These weren't just pit stops, they were crucibles where civilizations melted together. Step into Samarkand's Registan Square at the height of the Timurid Empire, and you'd hear a cacophony of dialects, Persian poets reciting verses beside Ikha musicians tuning their dutas, while Sogdian traders haggled over bolts of Byzantine brocade. The air hummed with the clang of coppersmiths and the sizzle of skewered lamb, a sensory overload that lingered in travelers' memories long after their camels moved on. Dunhuang, perched at the edge of the Taklamakan, was the Silk Road's great archive. Its Mogao caves, a honeycomb of nearly 500 grottos, preserved not just Buddhist murals shimmering with gold and lapis, but something far rarer, the Dunhuang manuscripts. Hidden for 9 centuries, this trove of scrolls included everything from Tang Dynasty tax receipts to Zoroastrian hymns, Nestorian Christian prayers penned in Syriac, and even the world's oldest known printed book, the Diamond Sutra. These weren't just artifacts, they were snapshots of a world where religions didn't clash, they conversed. A single cave might hold a statue of the Buddha flanked by Taoist immortals, while a mural overhead depicted the Hindu god Indra playing lute beside a Central Asian camel caravan. Cashka's Sunday market was where the Silk Road's soul pulsed loudest. Here, Kyrgyz herders in felt hats bartered yak wool for turpan raisins, while Han merchants tested the heft of Afghan lapis lazuli. The food stalls told their own story: steaming dumplings stuffed with Persian walnuts, flatbreads baked in tandoor ovens borrowed from India, bowls of lagman noodles stretching like silk threads, a dish born when Chinese wheat met Aighur lamb and Central Asian spices. Even the city's architecture was a patchwork: Buddhist stupas repurposed as Islamic minarets, Han-style courtyards hiding behind arabesque gateways. What made these cities extraordinary wasn't just their diversity, but their deliberate cultivation of it. Samarkand's rulers funded astronomical observatories where Persian and Chinese stargazers compared charts, while Dunhuang's monasteries ran scriptoria where scribes translated Sanskrit sutras into Tibetan and Tangut. Cashka's caravanserais doubled as diplomatic salons, a place where a Nestorian monk from Syria might debate metaphysics with a Confucian scholar over cups of fermented camel milk. The archaeological record whispers secrets these cities left behind. A Sogdian merchant's contract etched on birch bark, specifying payment in 7 bolts of silk and 3 jars of kucha raisins, or a child's toy camel carved from jade, lost centuries ago in a Cashka gutter. These fragments reveal a truth more precious than any spice or gem: that the Silk Road's greatest commodity was curiosity itself. Because when a Buddhist muralist in Dunhuang borrowed Persian floral motifs, or a Samarkand chef tossed Chinese noodles with Central Asian herbs, they weren't just sharing goods. They were rewriting the recipe of human culture, one exchange at a time, and so these oases became something far beyond trading posts. They were idea factories where the world's knowledge simmered and fused. A Greek medical text might travel from Alexandria to Samarkand, get translated into Sogdian with commentary by an Indian physician, then influence Ming Dynasty acupuncture manuals. The same camel that carried silk could bear a revolutionary thought, and that's how these cities transformed the globe. From the way we pray to the spices in our kitchens, their legacy lingers, proof that connection has always been humanity's most vital currency. The Silk Road did more than transport silks and spices. It carried faiths across continents, turning merchants and monks into unlikely missionaries. Picture a Buddhist monk from Gandhara, his robes dusty from the Karakoram passes, unfurling a scroll painted with scenes of the Buddha's life before a crowd of Han Dynasty officials. This wasn't just a sermon, it was a cultural earthquake. Buddhism's journey from India to China was masterful adaptation, the Buddha's teachings merging with Taoist concepts to become Chan, later Zen, while statues in Dunhuang's caves gradually shed Indian features for East Asian ones. The Lotus Sutra, translated into Chinese by the tireless Kumarajava, a scholar dragged to Chang'an as war booty, became a bestseller along the trade routes, proving ideas could travel even when armies clashed. But Buddhism wasn't alone. Nestorian Christians, followers of a branch exiled from Byzantium, erected towering stone steles in Xi'an, their crosses entwined with lotus flowers. Tang Dynasty records describe them healing emperors with Frankish medical arts, likely Greek herbalism, and debating Taoist sages at court. Their churches, called Persian temples by locals, stood alongside Zoroastrian fire altars in cities like Samarkand, where priests tended sacred flames that had burned since Cyrus the Great. Even Islam, late to the Silk Road's spiritual bazaar, spread not just by conquest but through Sufi mystics who recited poetry in caravanserais, their verses comparing divine love to the ache of a merchant far from home. Tolerance flickered like those Zoroastrian fires, sometimes bright, sometimes smothered. The Tang dynasty's golden age welcomed Nestorians, Manichaeans, and Muslims as foreign talents, while the Mongols later adopted a radical pluralism, employing Uyghur Buddhists as administrators and Persian Muslims as financiers. But sparks flared too. When anti-Buddhist persecution erupted in 9th century China, monks smuggled sutras into the Dunhuang caves, sealing them for 1,000 years. And in Central Asia, the clash between Buddhist stupas and Islamic minarets wasn't always metaphorical. The Great Mosque of Samarkand rises on foundations that once held a monastery. What's startling is how faiths borrowed from each other. Buddhist cave temples in Kizil used Mediterranean-style fresco techniques, painting the Buddha with Apollo's halo. Persian miniatures depicted Mariam Mary in poses borrowed from Buddhist iconography, while Central Asian Manichaeans blended Christian parables with Zoroastrian dualism. Even the Quran's promise of rivers of wine in paradise might owe a debt to the grape-loving Sogdians who helped translate it. Yet the most enduring legacy wasn't just in temples or texts, it was in the sciences these religions carried. Nestorian monks brought star charts from Alexandria to Xi'an, while Buddhist pilgrims recorded Ayurvedic medicine in Dunhuang's libraries. When the Abbasid Caliphate sought wisdom for its House of Wisdom in Baghdad, it turned to Silk Road hubs like Merv, where Zoroastrian astronomers had preserved Ptolemy's works. The same routes that bore sutras and psalms also carried papermaking from China, algebra from India, and the astrolabe from Greece, proving that the search for divine truth often unlocked earthly knowledge. And that revelation, that science and spirituality traveled hand in hand, would ignite a revolution far greater than any merchant's wildest dreams. While camel caravans carried silks and spices, the most revolutionary cargo moving along the Silk Road was knowledge, ideas so powerful they reshaped civilizations. Take paper, that humble Han Dynasty invention born from mulberry bark and rags. By the 8th century, Muslim scholars in Samarkand were refining Chinese techniques, adding linen for durability and creating the crisp sheets that would preserve everything from Quranic verses to algebra treatises. When Abbasid Caliph Harun al-Rashid established Baghdad's House of Wisdom, he stocked its libraries with paper scrolls instead of brittle papyrus, accelerating an intellectual explosion. Suddenly, a single caravan could transport the equivalent of a library Greek philosophy transcribed in Arabic, Persian medical manuals, Indian astronomical charts, all because of this unassuming medium. Then there was gunpowder, initially a Taoist alchemist's failed attempt at immortality. Chinese military engineers soon harnessed its explosive potential, but it was Mongol traders, often dismissed as mere conquerors, who became unlikely science communicators. They transported saltpeter recipes to the Islamic world, where chemists in Damascus tweaked formulations for siege cannons. By the 13th century, those same recipes echoed in European workshops, altering warfare forever. Yet the Silk Road's genius lay in reciprocity. Even as gunpowder traveled west, Middle Eastern glassmaking techniques migrated east. Artisans in Chang'an mastered Syrian glassblowing methods, creating luminous beads that adorned Tang nobility, while Central Asian astronomers combined Chinese star maps with Greek celestial models to predict eclipses with startling accuracy. At the heart of this exchange stood scholars like al-Biruni, an 11th century polymath who embodied the Silk Road's intellectual ferment. Born in Central Asia, he calculated the Earth's circumference using data from Indian and Persian sources, wrote Sanskrit grammars for Muslim readers, and even speculated centuries before Columbus about the existence of lands beyond the Atlantic. His masterpiece, The Chronology of Ancient Nations, wove together Zoroastrian, Hindu, and Islamic calendars, proving that the Silk Road's true currency wasn't silver but perspective. Mathematics became a universal language in this cross-continental dialogue. Indian numerals, including the revolutionary concept of zero, filtered through Persian scholars to Baghdad, where mathematicians like Al-Khwarizmi systematized algebra, a term derived from his book, Al-Jabr. Meanwhile, Chinese officials adopted Islamic quadrants to refine their celestial observations, and Byzantine physicians incorporated Ayurvedic pulse diagnosis into their practices. The result was a tapestry of innovation where no civilization could claim sole credit, where a Persian astrolabe might guide a Song dynasty navigator, or a Greek medical text translated into Iker save a Mongolian herdsman's life. Yet these breakthroughs weren't just about practical gains. They reshaped how humanity saw itself. When paper made books affordable, literacy ceased to be an elite privilege. When gunpowder demolished castle walls, it also crumbled old notions of invincibility. And when scholars like al-Biruni insisted that truth transcended borders, they planted the seeds of a radical idea. That knowledge belonged not to kings or priests, but to anyone with the curiosity to seek it. This cross-pollination of minds found its purest expression in the arts. Just as equations and elements mingled, so did melodies and pigments, Persian miniatures absorbing Chinese landscape techniques, Buddhist chant rhythms infusing Central Asian folk songs. In the workshops of Cashka, a single tile might blend Hellenistic floral motifs with Han Dynasty cloud patterns, while in Samarkand's observatories, star charts became artworks as intricate as the constellations they mapped. The Silk Road didn't just trade goods, it traded beauty, creating a visual and sonic language that still whispers to us today. The most enduring conversations along the Silk Road weren't spoken. They were woven, painted, and cast in clay. Consider the cobalt blue patterns dancing across a Ming Dynasty vase, their swirling vines echoing Persian gardens half a world away. This iconic blue and white porcelain wasn't purely Chinese invention, it was a dialogue. When 14th century Jingdezhen potters first fired these pieces, they used cobalt imported from Cayenne in modern-day Iran, a pigment so precious it was hauled across deserts in walnut-sized lumps. The designs, a fusion of Chinese brushwork and Islamic geometry, tailored for wealthy patrons in Istanbul and Damascus who craved exotic elegance. Even the kilns themselves evolved, adopting Central Asian dome shapes that distributed heat more evenly, proof that artistry traveled both ways. Textiles became canvases for cultural exchange. A 7th century Sogdian silk fragment unearthed in Xinjiang blends Hellenistic grapevines with Chinese phoenixes, while Byzantine weavers incorporated Sasanian pearl motifs into imperial robes. But the real revolution happened in the dye workshops of Samarkand, where artisans cracked the secret of purple of the ancients, a hue once reserved for Roman emperors, using fermented shellfish from the Mediterranean mixed with Central Asian alum. These weren't just pretty fabrics, they were wearable manifestos of connection, wrapping the world's elite in tangible proof of interdependence. Music and dance dissolved borders even more fluidly. When Tang Dynasty Emperor Xuanzong established his Pearl Garden Conservatory, its star performers weren't Han Chinese, they were Kuchian musicians from the Tarim Basin, playing Central Asian lutes modified with Chinese silk strings. Their compositions, preserved in Dunhuang manuscripts, reveal scales blending Indian ragas with Turkic pentatonic modes, the famous whirling dervish ritual. Its roots stretch back to Sogdian harvest dances witnessed by Sufi mystics in Bukhara, who recognized in their spins a metaphor for cosmic harmony. Architecture absorbed these influences like sandstone soaking up desert rain. The Great Mosque of Xi'an rises with the curved eaves of a Tang palace, but its minaret borrows from Nestorian church towers, while Samarkand's Shah Izinda necropolis stacks Mongol blue tiles in patterns inspired by Chinese latticework. Even the humble caravanserai became an architectural melting pot, Persian wind catchers cooling courtyards where Aigha merchants slept under Chinese-style tiled roofs. Yet beneath this creative ferment lurked tensions. Excavations at Panjikent reveal murals where Zoroastrian fire altars are hastily whitewashed, likely during the Arab conquests, only for Buddhist lotus motifs to appear decades later in the repainted layers. A 9th century Chang'an pottery workshop's ledger lists orders for Persian-style bowls, no foreign scripts, hinting at markets eager for exotic aesthetics but wary of foreign ideologies. The most poignant hybrid of all may be the Lovers of Valdaro, a 6,000-year-old double burial discovered near Mantua, Italy. The skeletons locked in an eternal embrace, wear necklaces of Baltic amber and steppe malachite, their grave goods a mosaic of Eurasian trade routes. Though predating the Silk Road's zenith, they embody its deepest truth, that art and love have always been the original diplomats, whispering across divides when politics and war fell silent. These silent trades left fingerprints everywhere in the way Central Asian fiddles evolved into the Chinese erhu, in the Greco-Buddhist statues of Gandhara with their draped robes and serene smiles, even in the dumplings that span from Polish pierogi to Uzbek manti. But as we'll soon see, not every exchange was so harmonious. For all its brilliance, the Silk Road also carried shadows, ideas that sparked conflict as readily as they kindled creativity. The same caravans that carried silks and spices also bore invisible, deadly passengers, microbes that would reshape history. When Mongol armies laid siege to the Genos trading post of Kaffa in 1346, they catapulted plague-infested corpses over the walls, unwittingly launching one of the deadliest weapons ever deployed. But it wasn't just warfare that spread disease, it was the everyday rhythm of trade. A flea-ridden marmot pelt from the steppes, packed alongside Persian rugs in a merchant's cart. A ship rat scurrying onto a Venetian galley docked at Constantinople. These tiny stowaways hitched rides along the Silk Road's arteries, turning bustling market towns into ground zero for pandemics that would kill millions. The Black Death's journey reads like a horror story written in trade ledgers, starting in the Tian Shan Mountains where Mongol herdsmen first fell ill. It reached the Volga River by 1345 via Golden Horde traders. From there, Genos merchants carried it to Sicily, where Giovanni Boccaccio later described corpses piled in Florence's streets, like lasagna between layers of cheese. By 1348, it had leaped from Paris to Oslo, outpacing even the fastest couriers. Ibn al-Wardi, a Syrian scholar who himself succumbed, wrote of bodies stacked like wine barrels in Damascus, while Chinese records from Hebei note entire villages where no chimney smoked for want of living hands to kindle fires. What made these outbreaks so catastrophic was the Silk Road's very success, its interconnectedness. When the Justinian plague struck Byzantium in the 6th century, it followed grain ships from Egypt, killing half of Constantinople in months. The Antonine plague of the 2nd century, likely smallpox, rode Roman legions back from Mesopotamia. These weren't isolated tragedies, they were previews of globalization's double-edged sword. A 14th century Persian doctor observed that the speed of death keeps pace with the speed of camels, recognizing what we now call superspreader events like the caravan stop where 40 merchants drank from the same well, only to collapse days later, their bodies forming a ghastly landmark for future travelers. Yet amid the terror came eerie parallels to modern responses. Venetian health boards instituted 40-day quarantines 40 giorni, while Cairo's hospitals separated patients by symptoms. Chinese physicians promoted masks stuffed with aromatic herbs, and Mongol Khans ordered disinfection of mail with vinegar smoke. When the Mongols' own ranks were decimated, they even suspended the Yam messenger system, Silk Road's ancient internet, to slow contagion. The psychological toll was just as profound. Persian poet Hafez wrote of cities where the living envied the dead, while Italian chroniclers described survivors dancing in graveyards, not from joy but delirium. In Europe, pogroms targeted Jewish communities wrongly accused of poisoning wells, a grim reminder of how fear outpaces facts. Yet the plagues also forged strange bonds. Muslim doctors in Granada treated Christian patients, while Yuan dynasty officials distributed rice to starving families regardless of ethnicity. As the 14th century waned, so did the Silk Road's golden age. The Black Death didn't just kill people, it shattered trust. Caravans grew smaller, routes contracted, and the Ming dynasty turned inward, dismantling its treasure fleets. The world's first era of globalization ended not with war or famine, but with a whisper, the rustle of a rat in the hold of a ship, the cough of a feverish merchant at a caravanserai. Yet in its wake came an unexpected legacy, the realization that no empire, no matter how mighty, could wall itself off from the consequences of connection. And that lesson, written in the scars of survivors, would echo through centuries to come. Even the greatest highways of history don't last forever. By the 14th century, the Silk Road's golden age was unraveling, not with a single dramatic collapse, but through a slow fraying of connections. One of the sharpest cuts came from the sea. As Arab and Persian sailors mastered monsoon winds, maritime routes began outpacing overland caravans. A ship could carry 100 times more cargo than a camel caravan, with fewer bandits and no mountain passes to navigate. Ports like Calicut in India and Malacca in Malaysia became new crossroads, where Venetian ducats traded directly for Sumatran pepper, bypassing the Silk Road entirely. Chinese junks, some with 9 masts and crews of thousands, reached as far as East Africa, hauling porcelain and tea that once trickled westward by land. Yet the Mongols, who once unified the Silk Road under their vast empire, also sowed the seeds of its decline. Their Pax Mongolica had been a double-edged sword. While it safeguarded caravans, it also concentrated wealth in the hands of a few Mongol elites. When the Black Death swept through their crowded trading hubs, it didn't just kill people, it shattered the trust holding this fragile network together. The Ilkhanate in Persia and the Yuan dynasty in China collapsed into civil wars, leaving once bustling caravanserais to crumble under desert sands. Then came the Ming dynasty's fateful decision. In 1433, Emperor Yongl's successors dismantled China's treasure fleets and rebuilt the Great Wall not just against northern nomads, but against the world itself. The Silk Road's eastern anchor withdrew, and without Chinese silk and silver flowing westward, entire Oasis cities withered. Samarkand's workshops still produced exquisite tiles, but fewer merchants came to buy them. The Sogdian language, once the lingua franca of trade, faded into obscurity. But here's the twist: the Silk Road never truly vanished. It lingered in the genes of Aikha musicians whose lutes still echoed Tang dynasty melodies, in the recipes of Kashmiri chefs who blended Persian saffron with Indian cardamom, even in the ledgers of Venetian bankers who'd once financed caravans. And centuries later, when explorers like Aurel Stein poked through the sands of Dunhuang, they didn't just uncover artifacts, they rediscovered a forgotten blueprint for globalization. The Silk Road's legacy wasn't in its decline, but in the indelible mark it left on every culture it touched. And that's where our journey takes its most surprising turn into the modern era, where archaeologists and historians are piecing together fragments to reveal how these ancient routes still shape our world today. The sands of the Taklamakan Desert guard their secrets fiercely until the right explorer comes along. At the dawn of the 20th century, Hungarian-British archaeologist Aurel Stein crouched in the ruins of Nia, a lost city swallowed by dunes for over 1,000 years. His fingers brushed the edge of a wooden tablet inscribed in Kharosthi script, its words last read by a Kushan official reporting a missing donkey. Nearby, the wind uncovered brightly painted cabinets still holding silk robes, their colors miraculously preserved by the desert's dry embrace. Stein wasn't just uncovering artifacts, he was resurrecting voices. Letters from long-dead merchants complaining about overdue payments, love notes tucked between floorboards, even a child's woolen sock with a hole in the toe, all whispered of lives interrupted by time. But the greatest treasure lay farther east in the Mogao caves near Dunhuang. Local caretaker Wang Yuanlu led Stein to a hidden chamber stuffed with 50,000 manuscripts, paintings, and textiles, a time capsule sealed in the 11th century to protect Buddhist texts from invading armies. Among them was the Diamond Sutra, the world's oldest dated printed book, predating Gutenberg by 6 centuries. Stein's hands trembled as he unrolled its 7 meters of delicate paper, each line of text a testament to how knowledge traveled these ancient routes. Yet his excitement came at a cost. For a pittance equivalent to about £130 today, Wang sold Stein thousands of manuscripts, sparking debates that still rage. Were these explorers preserving history or looting it? Swedish adventurer Sven Hedin took even greater risks. Mapping the treacherous Loppnor region, he nearly died of thirst before stumbling upon the ruins of Lulan, a Han Dynasty outpost abandoned to the desert. There, mummified bodies with European features and brightly woven tartan clothing hinted at connections between Rome and China long before Marco Polo. Hedin's sketches of crumbling stupas and faded frescoes became roadmaps for future scholars, but his methods, sometimes dynamiting ruins to reach artifacts faster, would horrify modern archaeologists. The ethical shadows of these discoveries stretch into our era. Many Silk Road treasures now reside in London, Berlin, and Tokyo museums far from their homelands. Yet without Stein and Hedin's often controversial efforts, countless artifacts might have been lost to looters or the elements. The library cave at Mogao, for example, was nearly emptied by Stein and later French explorer Paul Pelliot. But had they not intervened, its contents might have fed the stoves of local farmers who were burning manuscripts for warmth when Pelliot arrived. Today's archaeologists approach the Silk Road with lighter hands and sharper tools. Satellite imagery reveals buried caravan trails invisible from the ground, while DNA analysis of ancient teeth traces the migration of people and their microbes across continents. In Xinjiang, researchers using 3D scanners documented the beauty of Zairo, a 4,000-year-old mummy whose felt hat and woven grass basket speak of a life lived between rivers and dunes. Meanwhile, Chinese and Uzbek teams collaborate to digitally reconstruct the Afrasiab murals of Samarkand, their vibrant scenes of Tang Dynasty envoys and Persian hunters fading no further. The Silk Road's legacy isn't confined to glass cases or academic papers. Walk the streets of Istanbul's Grand Bazaar, and you'll hear echoes of the Sogdian haggling techniques still used by rug merchants. Taste a bowl of lagman noodles in Kyrgyzstan, and you're savoring a dish born when Chinese wheat met Central Asian lamb. Even the word check, derived from the Persian sak, meaning written promise, reminds us how Silk Road merchants invented prototypes of modern banking. These connections live on in the most ordinary moments. proof that history's greatest network wasn't built on silk or spice alone, but on the enduring human hunger to reach beyond the horizon. Centuries after its decline, the Silk Road is experiencing a rebirth, not in the form of camel caravans, but through China's ambitious Belt and Road Initiative. Launched in 2013, this modern infrastructure project mirrors the ancient network in startling ways. High-speed railways now thread through Central Asian valleys where silk-laden camels once trod, and deep water ports in Sri Lanka and Greece echo the maritime routes of Arab dhow ships. But beyond concrete and steel, the initiative carries a deeper symbolism, a recognition that connectivity, whether in the 1st century or the 21st, remains the lifeblood of progress. In Uzbekistan, the ancient city of Samarkand, once a melting pot of cultures, has become a hub for Chinese and European freight trains, its regenerated turquoise domes watching over a new era of exchange. Yet the Silk Road's modern revival isn't just about economics. Historians and adventurers are retracing its paths with a mix of scholarly rigor and personal curiosity. British author Colin Thubron spent months following the route by bus and donkey cart, collecting oral histories from elderly craftsmen in Cashka who still remember the last horse caravans. Meanwhile, archaeologists using satellite imaging have uncovered forgotten caravanserais beneath Kazakhstan's grasslands, their stone foundations hinting at long-vanished rest stops. Even social media plays a role. Instagram travelers document their journeys along the Pamir Highway, where crumbling Soviet-era signs still point toward ancient Oasis towns. Festivals breathe life into these echoes of the past. The Silk Road International Film Festival in Xi'an showcases movies from dozens of countries along the historic route, while Samarkand's Shark Taranalari Music Festival fills Registan Square with the same blend of Central Asian lutes and Persian poetry that once entertained Timurid emperors. Museums, too, have become time machines. The Xinjiang Silk Road Museum displays a 4,000-year-old mummy nicknamed the Beauty of Lulan, her felt hat and woven baskets preserved by the desert, while interactive exhibits in Istanbul's Topkapi Palace let visitors trade virtual spices along touchscreens. What makes the Silk Road's legacy endure isn't just nostalgia, it's the unanswered questions that still tantalize researchers. Why did the Sogdians, history's greatest middlemen, leave no written records of their own? What treasures lie beneath the dunes of the Taklamakan, where sandstorms periodically reveal fragments of long-lost cities? And perhaps most intriguingly, how many everyday objects in our homes, from porcelain teacups to walnut furniture, owe their existence to those ancient exchanges? The Silk Road reminds us that borders are human inventions, but connection is a universal instinct. And as long as people remain curious about the past, its stories will keep unfolding, one rediscovered artifact, one shared melody, one winding road at a time. For all its well-trodden paths, the Silk Road still guards secrets that defy explanation. Take the Tarim mummies, those astonishingly preserved bodies discovered in Xinjiang's scorching deserts, their European features and brightly woven woolens perfectly intact after 4,000 years. Who were these people with their felt hats and woven baskets, buried so far from their genetic kin? Their DNA links them to the Caucasus, yet they spoke languages now lost to time, their tombs filled with cheese and ephedra twigs for rituals no one fully understands. Even more puzzling, some mummies wear plaid patterns eerily similar to Celtic tartans, while others clutch tiny pouches of unidentified herbs. Were they traders who settled in the Tarim Basin, or refugees fleeing some forgotten conflict? Every clue raises new questions, like the mummy of the Beauty of Lulan, her serene face still framed by auburn hair, lips parted as if mid-whisper across the centuries. Then there's the mystery of the lost caravans. Chinese chronicles speak of entire merchant parties vanishing in the Taklamakan's shifting dunes, not to bandits or storms, but to something stranger. One Tang Dynasty account describes a group that strayed from the path near the vanished city of Nia, only to stumble upon ruins of a great settlement no map records, its buildings filled with untouched goods and meals still on tables, as if the inhabitants had simply evaporated. Modern archaeologists have found traces of these ghostly waypoints, sand-blasted timbers marking wells where no water flows, or scattered camel bones clustered in unnatural circles, suggesting desperate last stands. What forces could wipe out experienced travelers so completely? Some point to sudden sandstorms that bury everything in minutes, while others whisper of long-lost plagues or even ancient chemical weapons. A Persian manuscript mentions yellow powders that bring sleep without waking. The greatest enigma of all might be the library cave at Dunhuang. Sealed in the 11th century, its 50,000 scrolls survived intact. But why was it sealed? The leading theory suggests monks hid their treasures from invading Karakhittans, yet no battle records correspond to the cave's closure date. Stranger still, the library contains not just Buddhist texts, but Manichaean hymns, Nestorian Christian prayers, and Zoroastrian cosmologies stacked side by side, as if someone urgently preserved the entire spiritual spectrum of the Silk Road. Even the cave's location defies logic. It's not near the main monastery, but tucked behind a nearly invisible crack in the cliff face. Was it a time capsule meant for future generations, or a desperate act of interfaith solidarity in the face of some shared catastrophe? Technology is finally shedding light on these puzzles. Ground-penetrating radar has revealed the outlines of a sprawling, unknown city beneath the dunes near Cotton, its grid-like streets suggesting Roman-inspired urban planning. Spectral imaging on Dunhuang manuscripts has uncovered erased layers of text, including what might be the earliest known map of the Silk Road's western branches. And DNA analysis of the Tarim mummy's dental plaque recently identified remnants of ancient kefir and millet beer, proof that their funerary feasts were livelier than anyone imagined. Perhaps the most tantalizing clue lies in a scrap of Sogdian correspondence unearthed near Turpan. Penned by a merchant named Nanai Vandak, it laments how the roads grow strange and familiar faces vanish. Was he describing the slow unraveling of the Silk Road's golden age, or something more immediate, a crisis lost to history? For every answer uncovered, a dozen new questions emerge, ensuring that these ancient routes will keep whispering their secrets to those willing to listen. Satellites now scan the Earth with eyes sharper than any ancient scouts, revealing ghostly outlines of caravanserais and forgotten roads beneath desert sands. In the dry expanse of the Taklamakan, thermal imaging has detected the faint scars of camel trails invisible to the naked eye, paths last walked over 1,000 years ago. These infrared whispers tell stories no manuscript could, how traders navigated around shifting dunes where they dug emergency wells, even where exhausted animals were unloaded to lighten loads. One startling discovery near Lopner shows a caravan's abrupt detour, its tracks veering wildly before vanishing, perhaps fleeing bandits or a sudden storm. Meanwhile, multispectral analysis of Dunhuang's cave murals has uncovered painted-over layers, including a previously unknown map of Central Asian trading posts drawn with startling accuracy. DNA doesn't lie, and it's rewriting the Silk Road's history one tooth and bone fragment at a time. Isotope analysis of teeth from Sogdian tombs reveals these merchants drank water from dozens of different regions, proving they traveled far more extensively than records suggested. In Cashka's ancient cemetery, genetic testing on skeletal remains uncovered a shocking mix. Han Chinese, Persian, and even Viking DNA in the same burial ground, suggesting connections stretching from the Baltic to the Pacific. But the real bombshell came from a humble jar of jam. Residue in a 7th century ceramic pot found in Turpan contained traces of berries from the Caucasus, proof that perishable goods traveled these routes too, preserved in honey by ingenious methods we're only now understanding. The detective work extends to textiles. Laser spectroscopy can now pinpoint where a piece of silk was woven based on trace minerals in its dyes. A robe fragment from a Mongolian tomb, once thought to be Chinese, was recently matched to looms in Afghanistan, its gold threads containing gold mined from the Hindu Kush. Even spices tell tales. Mass spectrometers have identified peppercorns in Roman-era Egypt that could only have grown in Kerala, pushing back the timeline of India-Mediterranean trade by 3 centuries. What's next? Archaeologists are buzzing about quantum magnetometry, a technology that could detect buried metals without digging, potentially locating lost hoards of coins or ceremonial objects. And AI is being trained to cross-reference thousands of fragmented records, reconstructing trade networks with uncanny precision. One algorithm recently proposed the existence of a Southern Silk Road through the Karakoram based solely on linguistic patterns in merchant contracts. Yet for all these technological leaps, the most poignant discoveries remain deeply human. A child's mitten knit with Sogdian patterns but found in a Tang Dynasty trash pit. A love letter into Cayenne, its ink faded but its longing still palpable. These fragments remind us that beneath the grand narrative of empires and economies were ordinary people, merchants who missed their families, guards who etched doodles on watchtower walls, cooks who blended flavors from opposite ends of the earth. And that's where our journey turns next, not to satellites or labs, but to the intimate stories of those who laughed, loved, and sometimes perished along history's greatest highway. Imagine sitting by a flickering oil lamp in a caravanserai, listening to the wind howl outside as a weary traveler unfurls a scroll and begins to read. These first-hand accounts, diaries, letters, even hastily scribbled notes, are the closest we'll ever get to time travel. Take the Buddhist monk Zhang, whose 7th century journals read like an epic adventure novel. Crossing the icy Hindu Kush, he wrote of mountains like knives cutting the sky, his breath freezing into crystals on his robe. Yet what's most striking isn't the hardship, but his childlike wonder upon reaching India. The stupas glow like piled jewels, and the monks chant scriptures with voices like deep bells. His meticulous notes on everything from Gandharan art to local customs became a Rosetta Stone for historians. But between the lines, we glimpse a man who missed home. He once traded his last silver bowl for a bundle of Chinese tea leaves, just to smell the fragrance of his homeland. Then there's Marco Polo, whose descriptions of Kublai Khan's court teeter between awe and skepticism. His account of paper money, the Khan makes leaves of bark pass for gold, reads like science fiction to medieval Europeans. But it's the small details that linger, the Venetian's amazement at Chinese coal burning like logs of black earth, or his bafflement at noodles which he called threads of dough boiled and eaten with fingers. Half merchant ledger, half travelogue, Polo's writings reveal a man constantly recalibrating his understanding of the world. When he describes the singing sands of Dunhuang dunes that emit eerie musical tones, you can almost hear his pen scratching faster in excitement. Not all voices were famous. In the ruins of a Sogdian merchant's house near Turpan, archaeologists found a letter from a homesick wife named Ming, scrawled on birch bark. "I live wretchedly, without clothing, without money. 3 years you've been gone, are you alive?" Nearby, a child's practice handwriting repeats the same phrase in awkward strokes. "May the gods bring father home safe." These fragments, some never even sent, cut deeper than any epic. They remind us that behind the grand exchanges of silk and spice were people who laughed, feared, and loved just like us. And then there were the accidental chroniclers. A Persian doctor stationed in Cayenne kept a casebook detailing how he treated Tang nobility with Greek humoral theory, while secretly taking notes on Chinese pulse diagnosis. His marginalia include complaints about the overly sweet dates sent by a colleague in Samarkand and sketches of strange tools like a Chinese bronze acupuncture needle he labeled the devil's pin. What makes these writings so powerful is their immediacy. When a Nestorian priest describes celebrating Easter with Buddhist monks in a Cashka caravanserai exchanging painted eggs for rice cakes, we don't just learn about religious tolerance. We feel the rough wooden table under their elbows, taste the strange sweetness of date wine mixed with fermented mare's milk, hear the off-key harmonies of hymns sung in half-understood tongues. Now, imagine those same travelers sitting down to a meal after a long day's journey. The Persian doctor might recoil at the unfamiliar tang of Chinese soy sauce, while Marco Polo marvels at the way Central Asian merchants use flatbread as edible plates. Which brings us to the Silk Road's most delicious legacy, the flavors that crossed continents and never left our tables, because nothing connects us across time like the universal language of a shared meal. A caravan stops at a Bukhara caravanserai as the sun dips below the horizon, and the air fills with unfamiliar aromas: Persian saffron toasting in a wok, Chinese noodles sizzling in Central Asian lamb fat, grapes from the Mediterranean fermenting into wine beside barrels of Tang Dynasty tea leaves. This was the Silk Road's hidden genius. It didn't just move goods, it reinvented how the world ate. Take something as simple as noodles. The earliest known strands, discovered in China's Lajia archaeological site, date back 4,000 years. But by the 8th century, Arab geographers were writing about Itria, thin wheat threads traded from Samarkand to Syria. How did this staple leap continents? Look to the Uyghurs of Turpan, who adapted Chinese noodle-making techniques to their own wheat-heavy diet, creating lagman, a dish so enduring it's still served in Xinjiang today. Its hand-pulled strands topped with cumin-spiced mutton and peppers from the Americas that arrived centuries later. Saffron's journey reads like a thriller. Persian growers jealously guarded the crocus filaments, even planting false routes on maps to mislead rivals. Yet by the Tang Dynasty, Chinese poets were rhapsodizing about golden threads, flavoring imperial desserts, while Byzantine chefs tossed them into seafood stews. The spice's allure wasn't just taste, it was alchemy. In Kashmir, Buddhist monks dyed robes with it. In Rome, Nero carpeted streets with saffron petals for celebrations. But the real surprise, saffron's price fluctuated wildly along the route. A 9th century Baghdad cookbook lists it as cheaper than pepper in some markets, while a Sogdian ledger from Dunhuang shows it costing more than jade by the time it reached China. Grapes tell an even twistier tale. Domesticated in the Caucasus, they traveled east with Zoroastrian refugees who needed wine for rituals. When Chinese vineyards failed to match Mediterranean sweetness, enterprising Turpan growers dug underground cellars to combat the desert heat, creating ice wine centuries before Europe. The real innovation came in Samarkand, where vintners blended Central Asian varieties with Persian techniques to create sherbet like sharbat, a precursor to modern sorbet that cooled caravans crossing the Kizilkum Desert. Bukhara's kitchens became laboratories for fusion cuisine. A 10th century cookbook describes samsa, a flaky pastry stuffed with Chinese-style minced lamb and Indian black pepper, baked in tandoor ovens adapted from Indus Valley designs. Modern plov, Uzbekistan's national dish, hides its multicultural roots in every grain. rice from China, carrots from Afghanistan, cumin from Persia, all slow cooked in a method borrowed from Mongolian cast iron pots. Even the humble dumpling morphed as it traveled. Chinese Jiaozi became Central Asian manti, their pleats growing more intricate under Sogdian influence before reaching Turkey as manti, drenched in yogurt and paprika. Some recipes survived against all odds. In Cashka's Sunday market, vendors still sell nang bread stamped with patterns identical to those found in Tang Dynasty tombs, while Herat's bakeries make mulberry stuffed cookies recorded in a 13th century Persian manuscript. The most poignant survivor, a Sogdian silk bread recipe rediscovered in a Dunhuang scroll, its ingredients millet flour, hemp seeds, and a dash of coriander mirroring emergency rations carried by caravans. Today's food historians have recreated it, noting how the earthy flavors speak of resilience and adaptation. But the Silk Road's culinary legacy isn't just about ingredients, it's about the words that traveled with them. The Persian term for sugar, shakar, became sakar in Arabic, zucker in German, and sugar in English, while the Mandarin cha for tea morphed into chai along Indian trade routes. These linguistic crumbs hint at an even richer exchange, one not of spices or silk, but of sounds and symbols that would reshape how civilizations spoke to one another. And that's where our journey turns next, to the whispers of forgotten languages that still echo in our mouths today. The bustling markets of the Silk Road didn't just trade goods, they traded words, creating a linguistic tapestry as vibrant as the textiles that passed through them. Picture a Sogdian merchant haggling with a Chinese official in a pidgin dialect peppered with Persian numbers and Turkic gestures, while a Tibetan monk translates Buddhist sutras into Aika using a hybrid script. Sogdian, the lingua franca of trade, was the glue holding this polyglot world together. Its cursive script, adapted from Aramaic, scrawled across caravan manifests and love letters alike, while its vocabulary seeped into languages from Mongolia to Mesopotamia. A single contract found near Turpan switches between Sogdian, Chinese, and Brahmi, proof that commerce often outpaced empires in forging connections. Some words traveled farther than the people who spoke them. Take chai, the Persian term for tea, which ricocheted from Mandarin cha to Russian che, Swahili chai, and even English slang, or sugar, derived from Sanskrit shakara, which became sakar in Arabic, zucchero in Italian, and azúcar in Spanish, sweetening tongues across continents. Even mundane terms like check from Persian sak, meaning written promise, reveal how deeply trade shaped language. The real surprise, some words took circular journeys. The Treacherous word for horse, Yaqui, likely originated from Proto-Indo-European, traveled east with nomadic tribes, then filtered back west via Silk Road exchanges, a linguistic boomerang spanning millennia. Decoding these lost languages required Rosetta Stone-level breakthroughs. When archaeologists unearthed the Bugut inscription in Mongolia, a 6th century tablet carved in Sogdian, Brahmi, and Sanskrit, it became a key to understanding how Turkic Khans communicated with Buddhist monks. Similarly, the Dunhuang manuscripts preserved samples of Khotanese, a once-lost Iranian language spoken in Xinjiang, complete with translations of Indian medical texts. The most poignant discovery, a child's wooden practice board from 9th century Kucha, its surface scratched with Treacherous letters alongside clumsy Chinese characters, evidence of a multicultural education where languages collided and merged. Yet the Silk Road's influence wasn't confined to parchment or stone. Listen closely, and you'll hear its echoes in the melodic cadence of Uzbek, where Persian poetry blends with Turkic rhythms, or in the Tibetan loanwords that pepper Mandarin tea house slang. Even silence speaks volumes. The abrupt disappearance of Kharosthi script from Central Asian records hints at political shifts that rewrote linguistic maps overnight. Now imagine those same polyglot merchants pausing their negotiations to admire a new arrival's attire. Just as words crossed borders, so too did fabrics, dyes, and tailoring techniques, each stitch carrying a story of cultural fusion. From the Persian-inspired floral patterns on Tang Dynasty silks to the Han-style collars adapted for Turkic riding coats, fashion became another language. One woven not with letters but with threads of indigo, gold, and crimson. A single bolt of silk wasn't just fabric, it was a revolution folded into itself. When Tang Dynasty aristocrats draped themselves in shimmering robes embroidered with Persian hunting scenes, they weren't just wearing status symbols, they were wrapping themselves in a map of the known world. The secret, China's monopoly on sericulture, the art of silk production, guarded as fiercely as any state secret. For centuries, only the Chinese knew how to coax the delicate threads from silkworm cocoons, boiling them in precise temperatures before unraveling filaments as fine as spider silk. The result was a fabric so light it could pass through a ring, yet so strong it could bear the weight of empires. Byzantine Emperor Justinian famously sent Nestorian monks to smuggle silkworms out of China in hollowed-out walking sticks, an act of industrial espionage that eventually broke the monopoly and birthed Constantinople's own silk workshops. Yet silk was only part of the story. In Samarkand's dye houses, artisans transformed plain cloth into liquid wealth using pigments more precious than gold. Tyrian purple, extracted from crushed Mediterranean sea snails, required 12,000 mollusks to color a single robe, making it the ultimate power flex for Persian royalty. Meanwhile, indigo from India stained Central Asian cotton a celestial blue, while cochineal insects from Armenia lent fabrics a scarlet so vivid it became synonymous with wealth in Tang China. The real alchemy happened in the blending. Sogdian dyers mastered gradient techniques, dipping fabrics repeatedly to create ombre effects that shimmered like desert sunsets. Patterns traveled even farther than the dyes. The swirling vines of Hellenistic art twisted their way onto Tang silks via Sogdian intermediaries, while Chinese cloud motifs appeared on Byzantine ecclesiastical vestments centuries later. In Japan, 8th century aristocrats coveted tie-dye silks from Tang China, unaware the technique originated in India. Even armor borrowed across cultures, Persian chain mail, inspired by Central Asian lamella designs, Tibetan helmets adorned with Greek-style nose guards. But perhaps the most surprising fusion was in everyday wear. Aighur herders adapted Han-style trousers for horseback riding, reinforcing the inseam with felt, an innovation that eventually reached Europe as the precursor to modern jeans. And in the bazaars of Bukhara, women's veils incorporated Chinese embroidery stitches to create geometric patterns unknown in either culture alone. These weren't just clothes, they were conversations. When a Sogdian merchant donned a robe woven with Chinese phoenixes and Sasanian pearl borders, he wasn't just dressing for success, he was embodying the Silk Road's essence, a world where identity could be as fluid as the dyes staining a dyer's fingertips. And just as these textiles carried melodies of distant lands, so too did the instruments that accompanied caravans under the stars, lutes shaped by Babylonian lyres, drums echoing Mongol hoofbeats, melodies that would weave their own kind of magic across continents. The lute's journey is a tale of transformation, its pear-shaped body passing from the hands of Babylonian minstrels to Persian poets before reaching the courts of Tang Dynasty China. Originally called the barbat in Persia, its deep, resonant tones accompanied royal feasts and Sufi meditations alike. But when it entered Central Asia, something extraordinary happened. Craftsmen in Samarkand blended its curved neck with the shorter, brighter people of China, creating hybrids that sang in entirely new voices. The pipa itself, with its 4 silk strings and bent neck silhouette, traveled west along the same routes, evolving into the Turkish baglama and Arabic oud. What's astonishing is how these instruments carried not just notes, but entire worldviews. A 7th century fresco in Kizil shows a Kuchian musician plucking a pipa while a Hellenistic harpist accompanies him, proof that melodies crossed borders long before diplomats did. Central Asia's courts became laboratories for sonic fusion. In Bukhara, musicians tuned their lutes to match Chinese pentatonic scales, while Tibetan throat singers adapted Mongolian horsehead fiddle techniques. The Turpan manuscripts reveal sheet music for a lost genre called Huyu, barbarian music, that blended Sogdian drum rhythms with Han Dynasty court melodies. Historians recently reconstructed one such piece, the Moon over High Pass, from fragments found in Dunhuang, played on a replica Tang-era pipa. Its haunting glissandos evoke caravan bells echoing through mountain valleys, a soundscape frozen in time. Games traveled these routes with equal ease. The chessboard became a battlefield of cultural exchange. Persian Shah pieces facing Indian elephants, their rules debated by Tibetan monks and Arab scholars in Cashka's tea houses. Even children's pastimes hybridized. Greek knucklebones transformed into Central Asian, ashuk dice games, while Chinese Go strategy spread to Korean and Japanese elites via Silk Road diplomats. A 9th century Sogdian painting shows nobles playing polo, a sport born on the Persian plains but adored by Tang emperors who built sprawling pitches in Chang'an. The real magic lay in how these diversions dissolved barriers. When a Byzantine merchant taught backgammon to a Aigha caravan guard, or a Nepalese princess introduced Tibetan monks to Indian card games, they weren't just passing time. They were creating shared languages of play. These interactions remind us that the Silk Road's greatest legacy wasn't just the goods exchanged, but the moments of laughter and competition that made strangers into companions under the vast, starry skies of the steppe. Beneath the flickering torchlight of caravanserais, amid the clatter of dice and the murmurs of traders huddled over game boards, the Silk Road revealed its playful soul. Chess, born in India as chaturanga, transformed as it traveled. Persian Shahs added their vizier. The Chinese adapted its rules into xiangqi with cannon pieces inspired by gunpowder weapons, and Arabs refined its strategies into shatranj. A 9th century traveler described a match between a Sogdian merchant and a Tibetan monk in Samarkand, their pieces carved from cotton jade and Turkic amber, the monk chuckling as he sacrificed his horse-shaped knight to trap the merchant's king. This wasn't just entertainment, it was diplomacy in miniature where rivals could duel without drawing blood. Dice games rattled through every Oasis town, their bones worn smooth by generations of hands. Excavations at Nia uncovered ivory dice etched with pips in the Kharosthi script, clutched in the skeletal fingers of a merchant who likely rolled his last throw. These weren't mere pastimes, they were social equalizers. A Byzantine chronicle tells of Emperor Justinian's envoy losing a fortune playing tabula, an early backgammon with Hephthalite nomads, only to win back their goodwill by teaching them loaded dice tricks. The game boards themselves became artifacts of cultural fusion. A Tang Dynasty fresco shows nobles playing liubo on a Persian-style inlaid table, while Mongol chieftains wagered gold on portable felt boards stitched with Chinese silk. But the real surprise lay in the cards, fragments of hand-painted playing cards from 9th century Turpan, likely ancestors of the Persian Ganjafar and Chinese money-suited decks, bear motifs of Central Asian camels and Han Dynasty coins. Scholars believe these flimsy paper rectangles traveled in the same saddlebags as Buddhist sutras, their suits evolving like languages. Indian cups became Chinese coins, Persian swords morphed into European spades. A Buddhist text from Dunhuang even warns monks against the four devils, likely a reference to card suits tempting them from meditation. Beyond the games, animals themselves became silent protagonists of the Silk Road story. Camels may have carried the cargo, but it was the humble donkey, sure-footed and stubborn, that navigated mountain passes too narrow for grand caravans. And in the shadows, domesticated cats prowled caravanserais, their bones found alongside rat-gnawed grain sacks in Merv's ruins. These creatures didn't just enable trade, they shaped its rhythms, from the falcons Mongol nobles traded for Persian hunting parties to the messenger pigeons whose flight paths became the first aerial maps of the route. One particularly poignant artifact, a child's wooden toy camel, unearthed in a Sogdian trader's house, tells a quieter tale. Its saddlebags are carved with miniature game boards, as if the child imagined their father playing chess atop the very beast that carried him to distant lands. In these small, personal objects, the Silk Road's grand narrative of exchange narrows to a single, intimate truth, that even in the midst of epic journeys, humans will always make room for play. No creature embodied the Silk Road's spirit more than the Bactrian camel, those shaggy, two-humped giants that could sniff out water beneath desert sands and carry half a ton of cargo for weeks without complaint. Their padded feet moved silently across shifting dunes, their nostrils sealing shut against sandstorms, their thick coats insulating them from freezing nights. These weren't just pack animals, they were marvels of evolutionary engineering. A single caravan might stretch for miles, each camel linked nose to tail by ropes of braided goat hair, their wooden saddles creaking under bolts of silk and sacks of pepper. The real secret to their success, those iconic humps stored fat, not water as many believe, allowing them to survive on sparse vegetation. Chinese poets called them sand boats, while Persian traders swore they could predict storms by rubbing their ears together, a trick nomadic herders still use today. But the Silk Road's animal kingdom extended far beyond camels. The Fergana horses of Central Asia became the stuff of legend, towering, heavenly steeds with flaring nostrils and coats that shimmered like blood in sunlight. Han Dynasty Emperor Wu sent entire armies to secure them, believing these sweat-blood horses could outrun desert winds. Their endurance was unmatched. Some accounts claim they could gallop 300 miles in a single day. The secret lay in their breeding. Fergana's lush valleys produced horses with extra vertebrae for flexibility and massive hearts for stamina. When a single prized stallion finally reached Chang'an, the emperor composed odes comparing its stride to dragons dancing on clouds. These weren't just status symbols, they revolutionized Chinese cavalry, helping repel nomadic invasions for centuries. Dogs played unexpected roles too. Mastiffs from the Tibetan plateau guarded caravans against wolves, their deep barrels echoing through mountain passes. Meanwhile, pampered Pekingese lapdogs bred to resemble lions became coveted gifts for Byzantine empresses, their flat faces and flowing manes turning them into living symbols of Buddhist guardian spirits. Even birds were part of this menagerie. Falcons from Mongolia traded for Persian hunting parties, messenger pigeons carrying scrolls between oasis towns, and minor birds trained to greet customers in bazaars with phrases in 5 languages. The environmental impact of these animal networks was profound. Caravan routes followed ancient migratory paths, their stops determined by grazing lands and water sources. In the Taklamakan Desert, archaeologists have found camel stones, petroglyphs marking hidden springs where generations of drivers led their beasts to drink. But this interdependence came at a cost. Overgrazing around caravanserais turned lush stops into wastelands. while the demand for warhorses depleted Central Asia's grasslands. A Tang dynasty edict even banned the capture of wild Fergana horses during droughts, recognizing how fragile the balance had become. Yet the most enduring legacy might be in the stories these animals inspired. The Persian epic Shahnameh tells of Rustam's mythical steed Rakesh, who fought lions to protect his master. Buddhist Jataka tales describe merchants saved by loyal elephants who remembered ancient desert trails. Even today, the descendants of those Silk Road camels still plod across the go-by, their bells echoing the same rhythms that once connected continents. And as their shadows stretch long across the dunes, they remind us that every exchange, whether of silk, spices, or ideas, rested on the backs of creatures who asked for nothing but a handful of scrubgrass and a drink of muddy water. This delicate dance between human ambition and nature's limits sets the stage for our next chapter: how the Silk Road's thirst for resources reshaped landscapes, and what its ghostly ruins can teach us about sustainability today. The same caravans that carried silks and spices also transported stowaways with lasting consequences: seeds, insects, and microbes that quietly reshaped ecosystems across continents. Take the humble apple. Its wild ancestors grew only in Kazakhstan's Tian Shan Mountains, but as merchants snacked on the tart fruit during stops, they discarded cores that sprouted into orchards from Samarkand to the Mediterranean. By the Tang Dynasty, Chinese poets wrote of Western peaches hybridizing with local varieties, their sweetness forever altering regional cuisines. Yet not all travelers were so welcome. Black rats from South Asia, hitching rides in grain sacks, decimated bird populations in Persia's date palm groves, while Mediterranean chestnut blight, likely carried on ship timbers, ravaged Central Asia's walnut forests by the 12th century. The demand for luxury goods exacted a heavier toll. Lebanon's famed cedar forests, logged to build Phoenician ships and Roman villas, dwindled to skeletal remnants by the Byzantine era. A single Han Dynasty lacquerware workshop required thousands of trees for their signature red pigment, stripping hillsides bare and forcing artisans to seek substitutes like toxic cinnabar. Even water became a casualty. The ancient city of Merv's elaborate irrigation canals, designed to grow cotton for export, eventually drained the Murghab River to a trickle, leaving behind salt pans where crops once flourished. Yet amid this exploitation flickered moments of remarkable foresight. Sogdian merchants enforced strict quotas on Argali sheep horn prized for carving to prevent overhunting along the Pamir routes. Tang officials mandated that for every sandalwood tree felled in Guangdong, 3 saplings must be planted, their edicts carved into stone steels still standing today. The most ingenious solution came from caravanserai architects, who designed underground qanats to channel glacial meltwater across deserts, minimizing evaporation while sustaining oasis towns for centuries. These ancient dilemmas echo uncomfortably today. The Silk Road's ghost cities, abandoned when resources ran dry, stand as stark warnings against short-term thinking. Lulan's crumbling stupas, half buried by the advancing Taklamakan, testify to what happens when water tables collapse. The ruins of Panjikant's once lush orchards, now dust bowls after excessive irrigation, mirror modern California's aquifer crises. Yet the road's deeper lesson isn't one of doom, but adaptation. Just as medieval Samarkand switched from wheat to drought-resistant millet when rains failed, today's innovators might look to ancient water harvesting techniques to combat desertification. This interplay between human ambition and environmental limits sets the stage for our next chapter, not just the ghost cities left behind, but the stories whispered by their sun-bleached walls. For in their silent courtyards and empty market stalls, we find haunting reminders that civilizations rise and fall not just by the sword, but by the weight of their footprints upon the earth. The ruins of Lulan emerge from the Taklamakan Desert like a mirage, a skeleton of sun-bleached timbers and crumbling mud brick walls, half buried by relentless dunes. Once a thriving Oasis hub where Sogdian traders haggled with Han Dynasty officials over bolts of silk and jade, its abandonment remains one of history's haunting mysteries. Walk its empty streets today, and you'll find wooden lintels carved with Hellenistic vines, faded murals of Buddhist deities with Mediterranean features, and the occasional leather shoe still curled to the shape of its owner's foot. What silenced this bustling waystation? Clues hide in the pollen. Core samples reveal that around the 4th century, the Tarim River, Lulan's lifeline, abruptly shifted course, leaving its canals dry. But human folly played a role too. Ledger fragments show officials ignored warnings about over-irrigation until the last well turned to dust. 100 miles west, the ruins of Murin whisper a darker tale. Here, stupas adorned with Greco-Buddhist frescoes stand guard over mass grave skeletons sprawled mid-flight, some clutching precious bundles of silk as if fleeing an unseen catastrophe. Archaeologists once assumed invaders razed the city, but a closer look reveals stranger truths. Charred grain stores suggest panic-fueled fires, while hastily sealed documents mention the Black Wind, possibly a plague-bearing sandstorm. The real tragedy, Murin's end, came during its golden age. Just before abandonment, artisans had perfected a vibrant new paint palette using Afghan lapis and Indian indigo, their half-finished murals now flaking into oblivion. These ghost cities share an eerie poetry. At Nia, poplar trees planted 2,000 years ago still claw at the sky, their gnarled roots gripping nothing but sand. In the courtyard of a merchant's house, a child's toy camel lies beside a wooden tablet inscribed with a desperate plea, "Send water." Yet amid the melancholy, there's awe. The Tarim mummies, those copper-haired nomads preserved by the desert's dry, embrace wear felted woolens in patterns echoing Celtic plaids, their existence rewriting our understanding of Bronze Age migration. This blend of beauty and mystery has long captivated storytellers. From the lost cities in Marco Polo's fantastical journals to the shifting sands of Dunhuang in modern films like The Silk Road, these ruins symbolize more than decay, they're monuments to impermanence. Japanese novelist Yasushi now reimagined Lulan's fall as an elegy for lost connections, while Chinese director Jia Zhang used the abandoned outpost of Fengji as a metaphor for displacement in still life. Even video games like Uncharted and Assassin's Creed weave Silk Road ruins into their labyrinths, proving these spectral cities still fire our collective imagination. Their crumbling walls remind us that every empire, no matter how grand, is but a whisper in the wind, yet their stories, like the Silk Road itself, never truly fade away. The Silk Road's winding trails and whispered secrets have long captivated storytellers, transforming its history into a playground for the imagination. Take Taha Ben Jelaun's The Sand Child, where the desert caravans become a metaphor for identity, shifting as endlessly as the dunes, their paths as uncertain as the protagonist's journey. The novel doesn't just describe the route, it embodies its essence, blending Berber folklore with the restless energy of merchants chasing horizons. Similarly, the film The Silk Road 2021 paints a haunting portrait of the Tang Dynasty's twilight, where a lone traveler's quest mirrors the fragile threads connecting empires. The cinematography lingers on details, a Sogdian merchant's chapped hands counting coins, a half-buried Buddha statue watching over abandoned trails, inviting viewers to read the landscape itself as a character. Video games have turned the Silk Road into interactive adventures. Assassin's Creed fans still debate whether the Hidden Blades design was inspired by Persian daggers traded along the route, while Uncharted, The Lost Legacy sends players scrambling through fictional Kushan ruins that echo real Gandharan architecture. The indie game The Wandering Village takes it further. Its nomadic society built atop a giant camel-like creature, a literal metaphor for the transient nature of trade hubs. Even board games like Silk Road gamify the merchant experience, forcing players to balance risk and reward as they navigate bandits and sandstorms. Artists, too, draw from this well of inspiration. British painter Edmund Dulac's Caravan at Dawn captures the eerie stillness of desert travel, the camels' silhouettes dissolving into gold-hued mist. Meanwhile, contemporary Chinese artist Zhu Bing recreated the route in the Phoenix Project, sculpting mythical birds from construction debris, a commentary on how ancient trade birthed modern globalization. The most intriguing works, though, are the fan theories. Some claim Tolkien's Middle-earth maps mirror Central Asian trade routes, with the Shire as Xi'an and Mordor as the Taklamakan's perilous waste. Others spot Silk Road motifs in Star Wars, Tatooine's bazaars echoing Samarkand, Jabba's palace resembling a caravanserai gone rogue. What makes these portrayals resonate isn't just exoticism, it's the timeless human themes woven into the route's fabric. The longing for connection, the tension between risk and discovery, the way cultures transform when they collide. Whether in a novel's pages or a game's pixelated deserts, the Silk Road endures because it's more than a path. It's a mirror reflecting our own journeys, the deals we broker, the borders we cross, and the stories we carry like precious cargo, hoping someone somewhere will trade us something equally extraordinary in return. The Silk Road's greatest legacy isn't measured in bolts of silk or sacks of spice. It's the invisible threads it wove between civilizations, transforming strangers into neighbors and ideas into revolutions. Think of it as history's first internet, a sprawling network where goods, beliefs, and innovations traveled faster than empires could draw borders. From the Buddhist monk who carried medicinal herbs from India to Cayenne, to the Sogdian merchant whose haggling techniques still echo in Istanbul's Grand Bazaar, these travelers built a world where diversity wasn't just tolerated, it was the engine of progress. Their stories whisper a timeless truth. Connection isn't just about trade routes, it's about the courage to venture beyond the familiar and the humility to learn from those who walk different paths. Today, we see the Silk Road's fingerprints everywhere, in the spices flavoring our meals, the stories shaping our books, even the algorithms powering our digital networks. But its deeper lesson is one of resilience. When sandstorms buried caravanserais or plagues emptied cities, the road didn't vanish, it adapted. Merchants forged new paths, scholars preserved knowledge in hidden libraries, and artisans blended traditions into something entirely new. That same resilience echoes in modern efforts to revive ancient crafts, from Samarkand's ceramicists recreating Timurid-era glazes to chefs reviving forgotten recipes like Sogdian silk bread. These aren't just acts of preservation, they're acts of defiance against the erosion of memory. So where do we go from here? The Silk Road invites us to become modern-day explorers, not necessarily by crossing deserts, though that's an option, but by seeking out the living threads of its legacy. Visit a museum showcasing Dunhuang's digitized manuscripts, savor a bowl of lagman noodles traced back to Tang Dynasty kitchens, or support artisans keeping ancient textile techniques alive. Better yet, look for the unexpected connections in your own life, the way your morning tea links you to Himalayan traders, or how the numerals on your phone descend from Indian mathematicians. The road's final secret is this: it never really ended. Every time we choose curiosity over fear, exchange over isolation, we honor its spirit, because the Silk Road wasn't just a route, it was a choice. A choice to believe that the stranger across the mountain might have something precious to share, and that the greatest treasures aren't found in chests of gold, but in the messy, magnificent collisions of cultures. And that's a journey worth continuing, one conversation, one discovery, one shared meal at a time.